Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle program, and I am your host, Chris Angle. The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to analyze the nature and essence of concepts being used in current media. And this week, we're going to discuss the implications of Brussels and the terrorist activity of the Islamic State there. With me are my co-hosts, Remy Canario, a political analyst out of New York City, and Rick Samuelson, a venture capitalist on the West Coast. How you doing, guys?
Very well, sir. Very good. Thanks for having us, Chris.
Okay, so let's start with our discussion and analysis of Brussels and its implications. First, obviously, there's been a terror event, and ISIS has claimed responsibility, or really, should I say, the Islamic State, because now it's changed its name again and is now the Islamic State, and has really set up a government that is acting like a state, a country, and so we want to analyze the implications of what a terrorist act is going to be in the U.S. media. Perhaps it's going to have an effect on immigration, and perhaps there's going to be a conflict between the administration of Barack Obama, who again wants to encourage a large influx of Syrian refugees, as reported by the Washington Examiner. And we can, let's see here. If we go here in the Washington Examiner, it says that and that's the power of our example, our openness to refugees fleeing ISIL's violence, our determination to win the battle against ISIL's hateful and violent propaganda, a distorted view of Islam that aims to radicalize young Muslims in their cause, and he goes to state that he wants to bring in more Muslims from the Middle East, and so I'm not sure whether that's a great idea, and I'd like to bring in a little bit of taking from the Koran, whether this is a good idea from because a video released by ISIL, as Obama likes to call them, has said that and Quran has decided waging jihad against the disbelievers until they give the jizya willingly, while they are humbled, and the Islamic State has asked them to give it, but they refused. The jizya is a tax on those who are non-Muslim, and this comes from the Quran, Surah 9, verse 5. So when the sacred months have passed away, then slay the idolaters wherever you find them, and take them captive, and besiege them, and lie in wait for them in every ambush. Then if they repent and keep up prayer and pay the poor rate, and that's the jizya that we see up here, leave their way free to them. And so evidently the Islamic State has told the West to pay the jizya, and of course the Western governments have refused, and therefore, according to this verse and others, they feel free to wage terror on the Western states, and when they say terror, we can search into the Quran for its reference there. For example, in the Surah 3, verse 56, as to those who reject faith, I will punish them with terrible agony in this world and in the hereafter, nor will they have anyone to help. And so this justifies the terror that the Islamic State is bringing to the West. There's other notations of terror in the Koran in Surah 3, verse 151. Soon shall we cast terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, for that they joined companions with Allah, for which he had sent no authority. And in Quran, Surah 8, verse 12, I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. Therefore strike off their heads and strike off every fingertip of them. And here again in Surah 8, verse 15, if thou comest to them in the war, deal with them so as to strike fear in those who are behind them, that haply they may remember. And so there's a significant amount of reference, if we read the Quran in a fundamental fashion, that support bringing terror to those who are unbelievers. And of course, why the use of suicide attacks? We can refer to Quran, Surah 2, verse 207. And there is the type of man who gives his life to earn the pleasure of Allah. Okay, so we've got the reason why they're coming for us in Western Europe, and I think it should be taken into the political process over the next many months, debating whether the immigration from the Middle East is good for America or outside of the interests of America, in reference to the refugees and migrants and so forth. And so what should the U.S. policy be in this matter, and how do we stop it? And what do the candidates say about that? And I know that some of the Democrats are really for open borders. I saw in an interview with in one of the town halls, I think both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton declared that really, I think it was with that journalist named Jorge, that they declared that anybody should be able to come here, and which is pretty much open borders. So on that side we've got open borders, and on the other side we've got Trump, who leads the voice in anti-immigration, particularly from the south of the border. And well, I don't know if it's anti-immigration, it needs to be controlled. It needs to become legal immigration. And to do that, he wants to build a fence, and so he's really coming and setting the tone for immigration, and he's come out with a couple of different policies. Of course, one is to stop the refugees, and the other is the fence, the famous fence. And it's also, he's the one that leads in how to stop terrorism. I believe he's the only one that's come across with a solution. The others have just said, well, we got to continue with the bombing. But I'm not sure that's really going to be effective, and I'm going to ask for you guys your opinions of this. But Trump has stated that really the way to do this is to follow the money. And the way to follow the money is to just go in and stop their revenue coming from the oil fields in the Islamic State. And this will defund their efforts. And he's got a point, because, you know, starting from over the last 50, 60 years, terrorism really only started to come about in the early 90s with the 1992 bombing of the World Trade Center, and then has gradually increased. And now we see it all the time. And it wasn't until all the oil money started to enrich that area have they been able to come forth with their activities of terrorism. So I think he's got a great idea, and I think the others are that's why the others are in second place, and he leads he leads everybody in the discussion. Um, of course, on the other side, he's considered he's been called not a conservative, and he's been called a bigot, and because he's anti bringing in stopping the immigration from the Middle East, and stopping the free flow of immigration or migrants from the south of the border. But he's got a point. He wants to make America safe. So he's got a reasonable solution. And so he wants to take away their money by taking away their oil. And but he's also got some other. He's got another policy, of course, which is jobs, and I think that's well conquered if he gets what he wants on his tax reduction to 15% of the corporate tax. I think jobs will naturally flow back into the American economy because of that. So let's summarize this. The left and especially the Democrats have said that because we have discrimination, because we are poor, because we are there in the Middle East, that it's unfair to them, and thus we've exploited the Middle East, and therefore we can accept the possibility of terror happening here as a natural occurrence to our being there, is for them to come out with violence against us. But I don't think that. I think that's a fatuous argument, because I really think that it's because of their fundamental reading of the Koran that gives them their impetus to come and create acts of terrorism in the West. And if it's just that we're creating a mental economic distress in their mind, then and that they are justified to strike back, then I don't see it as a justification, because just us being and existing is not an unethical act, but a vengeance upon our existence is definitely an unethical act, and so it's not equatable. And so, guys, I want to ask your opinion of all this. What do you think about Brussels and terrorism? How do we stop it? How do we go forward? What should the candidates say about it? Love to hear what you guys have to say about it. Who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Go.
Chris, you have sometimes very creative interpretations of the ideas and impulses on the left, and also a bit of history, because I think it's pretty clear that the beginning of violent jihad really finds its origins in Afghanistan, which was clearly before the 1990s, where we essentially gave money and arms to jihadists to wage war against the Soviets. That's where they developed their skills. That's where they developed their contacts. And that's where Al Qaeda and other organizations of terror were founded. Additionally, I would hardly say that it's a popular position on the left that we deserve to have violence inflicted on us because of our actions. I challenge you to find someone who actually does believe that, who doesn't belong in some kind of mental institution. But when it comes to the question of Brussels, what we have is not a situation where the Syrian refugee crisis was really the catalyst. As in the case of Paris, the vast majority of the people involved were European citizens with passports that allowed them to circulate throughout the Schengen zone, that allowed them to evade what is patently an insufficient intelligence apparatus on the part of the Belgians and on the part of the EU as a whole. So basically, the two root causes of the attacks in Brussels are very simple. You have an alienated minority of Muslims in Belgium who are not integrated into the society, do not have strong economic prospects, and therefore are vulnerable to radicalization. And second, the project of European integration has stalled at a place that's untenable, just like in the euro. You cannot have monetary union without fiscal union, and in this case, you cannot have open borders without shared intelligence services. So the lessons to be drawn from Brussels for the United States are: let's not skimp on our intelligence. Let's be aware of the fact that there are bad people out there trying to do us harm, and have the necessary conversations about the balance between right to privacy and security, but not look at this through rose-tinted glasses as if we weren't living in such a difficult age. And second, that we must do everything in our power to prevent the kind of alienation that has occurred in Belgium to occur to our Muslim population. Now, rhetoric and policies that, like Trump's ban on Muslim immigration, seem to be precisely a good way to work against that second imperative.
Okay. Rick?
Well, on that last point, I'd say I disagree. There seems to be, in this debate, a false binary choice. Either you let Muslims in or you keep them out. There's a third alternative that we've used many times in our history, for example, in World War II, where you provide aid, both humanitarian aid and military aid, to the locations where the trouble arises. And you don't necessarily have to import people. There's no reason you have to import Syrians here. In fact, to empty out Syria or any other location in the Middle East of people who are trying to flee because they don't agree with ISIS is, in essence, enabling ISIS by crowding out those who would rather have a more civilized lifestyle. So I don't agree that we're in a binary situation. I don't agree with what Angela Merkel did. I think she's going to end up damned by history because she'll have been the root cause for what I think is going to be a gradual disintegration in the EU. Because morally, what she did was utterly indefensible. And the reason it was indefensible is that she's provided privileged access to non-EU persons at the expense of unemployed people all across Europe. And the unemployment rates in Europe remain horrific. On average, it remains 10%. That's the official figure, unchanged since the financial crisis, by the way. No improvement at all. And in Southern Europe, the unemployment rates, and that includes France, by the way, are high double-digit rates. So there are no jobs for these Muslims. All right, the notion that jobs will suddenly arise when you've got economies that are either contracting or growing at 0.1% or 0.4% or whatever it is just a bunch of nonsense. Europe has no capacity to absorb people. That includes Germany, which has a labor participation rate even lower than the U.S., which itself is at a 40-year low. So her actions have been irresponsible. And what it represents is really a failure, a complete failure on the part of Europe to address the problem in its location. Europe has become so passive that it cannot take any proactive action to intervene in the Middle East or Russia or anywhere else. Anywhere. There's no military will to do anything. Not even much will to do any humanitarian aid. If they'd spent the billions they've spent on supporting the refugees that have come into Germany in improving conditions in the Middle East or militarily intervening, they could have had a much better result today and not be risking a further escalation in terrorist activity.
Yeah, and to further your point about humanitarian aid, not only humanitarian aid, but we could also send weapons. In fact, if you took a look at some of the most of the pictures of these people, the refugees are all young men of military age, and you could why bring those in? They should be fighting for their country, fighting for whatever they feel is right, standing up instead of escaping over the borders. We should be able to send weapons to them to let them work it out amongst themselves. And the Saudis have given humanitarian aid and refugee status to a significant population of refugees, but they only took the women and children and left those young men to go to Europe, I guess. Um, that seemed to me more sensible for what they did. They didn't want those young guys who are military age to who might be really terrorists and and create trouble in their own country, so they didn't take them. Um, and So I think we're getting Remy in and out here. So Remy, you there? I guess not. Okay. So and I wanted to also comment on Remy's comment to me because I thought he gave us a. Oh, you're back, Remy? Remy, are you back? No, I guess not. Because he gave an example of what I felt that the view of the left. He came through and it seemed to me he mirrored that very the example there with his we're talking about economic interpretation and economic non-integration into the Western society there in those countries, and so therefore they would have the will for demonstration and violence and whatever they do. So Rick, any further comments? We've got just a couple minutes here.
Well, I think I've stated my views on immigration, and I think the fact that
well, let me ask you then. Let me ask you, what do you think of Trump's proposal of going in and grabbing the oil and cutting their revenue source?
Well, I don't think that will slow them down, but I don't think they need. They are getting sources of cash from more than just the oil within that caliphate area. They are being funded by other states within the Middle East. It would certainly slow them down.
They are getting donations, exactly.
But is it the ultimate answer? I don't think so.
There was an extensive report on sources of ISIS funding, and it is my understanding that the vast majority of the money comes from taxes levied on people within their territories. That even if you cut off all of the funds that they're getting from oil, which are far more minimal than you would think because of the discounts they have to provide to their clients, would not really do much of a dent into their funding. If you look at the bigger picture.
Well, I tend to disagree, guys. I would say that it would put a huge dent into them. If you take away 40% of their budget, it's gonna crowd out a bunch of their.
But Chris, how much does it cost to strap a bomb to yourself and walk into an airport and blow yourself up? I don't think they aren't using sophisticated weapons. These aren't high-cost efforts that they're undertaking, and as long as Schengen, for example, remains in place, and I don't think it will last. Actually, in fact, it's disappearing as we speak. They'll be able to move freely and attack in many different locations, and it's easy to hide. There are large local Muslim populations who aid and abet these people. In fact, that was clear from the fact that the guy who planned the Paris attack was living right down the street in Molenbeek when they found him.
Yeah.
So he was obviously there are obviously many accomplices, and they can be found in almost all the major European cities.
Yep, you're right. Any final words, guys? We just got 2 minutes to go. How do you propose to stop the terrorism in Western Europe and sometimes here too?
I would say that the only way to stop the terrorism in Western Europe is going to be for the Europeans to start taking care of themselves and to start doing the only things that are really available to them in terms of intelligence solutions. Either you do what Richard has said and suspend the Schengen zone altogether, which I don't think is going to be the path that they take, because it's a considerable blow to the project of European integration, and far too big of a victory to hand ISIS. Or you do what should have been done a long time ago, and you create an EU-level intelligence service that can handle transnational problems.
Rick?
I think safe zones need to be created inside of Syria, and aggressive military action needs to be taken. Europe needs to help. They've so far been negligent in taking any action, any material action. They need to help. That needs to be made very clear to Germany. And I think, frankly, most, if not all, of the immigrants to Germany should be sent back once we secure the area in Syria and make it safe and provide enough humanitarian aid that these people won't starve and be hurt in any way.
Okay. Guys, I want to thank you for your participation again this week, and we'll see you next week on the Philosophical Angle.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.